Toddlers, parents of toddlers, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, know how incessant the word why can be. Why? Why can't I have a cookie right before dinner? So were the people of God, so are the people of God, with many whys. We who do not understand all of this. Why do people make choices that hurt themselves, we ask? Why do people make choices that hurt others? Why do I keep choosing the food that is not good for me? Why did I just say that thing that hurt my sibling? Why did my grandmother have to die? Why does the snake crawl on its belly when all the other creatures have legs? Why does childbirth hurt so much? Why do the weeds seem to grow stronger than the wheat? Why, if God is good, is life so hard? Why? We wrestle with these questions. And to answer this perennial problem, God gave us a story. We heard the first part of this story on Wednesday night when we came here to celebrate Ash Wednesday, the beginning of Lent. The earth was dry and dusty. A spring rose out of the ground to water the ground. And God stepped out into that now muddy landscape, knelt down, took up some of the mud that was there, formed it in God's hands, a head, a torso, arms and legs, fingers and toes, a mind, a heart, a soul. And then God took this lifeless form in God's hands and breathed God's very own breath until it came to life. And then God began to create a place for the human to live, a lush garden with trees of all kinds. That part's actually not in the story when you read this one creation story. There's suddenly just, while God's been busy building this human, there suddenly grows this fine garden, and God places the human in the garden. And then God tells the man, you can eat from any tree in this garden except this one, the one with the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. It's not good for you. Don't eat it. If you eat it, you will die. Unfortunately, God's children are like all children. The first thing you tell us not to do, we do it, don't we? Compassionate God said to God's self, it's not good for the human to be alone. So God created animals of every kind, and God let Adam name them all: giraffe and elephant. But none of them was quite the right companion for Adam. So finally, God put Adam to sleep and removed a rib from under his arm and built a woman, just the right companion for Adam. Fit right there where that rib had been missing. The storyteller tells us that they were completely vulnerable with one another, and they were not ashamed. But then a thought kind of slithers into their heads. Would it really be so bad if we just had a little taste? Just a little? What harm could it do, really? And so they listened to that voice more than they listened to the voice of God. And that is where everything began to go wrong. Suddenly they became aware of their nakedness, their vulnerability, and they were ashamed. They did what they could to cover themselves. They hid from one another behind some fig leaves. I read somewhere once, and you've heard me, I've said it here already before, but you may need to be reminded. Fig leaves have a bit of a toxin to them. They are not comfortable clothing. And so it is when we try to cover ourselves. We make ourselves and others a bit uncomfortable. They hid from themselves, they hid from one another, they hid from God. But as we told the children this morning, there's nowhere you can go where God will not find you. And God came into the garden looking for them. How broken-hearted God must have been. How it must have hurt God to tell them the consequences of their choices. You can't live here anymore, God said. You will know the pain of labor and the challenge of bringing sustenance out of the soil. Although Adam and Eve had eaten of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, they apparently didn't know that the clothes they had created were going to be uncomfortable and probably wouldn't last very long. I mean, we all know, we who have picked leaves, they tend to dry up and, fall apart after a little bit. So God, like a mother putting a cloak around her child before sending them out into the winter cold, buttoning it up, God fashioned more lasting clothes from them, from skins, and then sent them out from Eden. God gave us a story to explain all those whys. And what have we done with that story? We have made a doctrine. Doctrines aren't quite as much fun as stories, but our doctrine is the doctrine of original sin. We point, like Adam pointed to Eve and Eve pointed to the serpent, we point to Adam and Eve as the whole reason we can't seem to choose good. We sum up the story this way: it's in our nature to choose badly, and our bad choices lead to death. And it seems true, doesn't it? Doesn't it? God has told us what is good. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. But we don't do it. God has told us what is not good. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't desire something that's not yours to have. And yet, we do those things. And that's the problem. Those of you who have participated in recovery programs or who know people who have and who are now living sober lives, you or your friends would tell us that there's no moving towards a solution without first recognizing that there's a problem. On Wednesday night, we read from Psalm 51, in which the writer of that psalm acknowledges, I have a problem. I have been a sinner since I was born. I'm no different than the folks who traveled before me down this road or the folks who are traveling beside me. I am a sinner. If given a choice, I'm just as likely to choose poorly as to choose wisely. And that's the thing. God does give us a choice. Silly God. If God had not given us a choice, we would just be puppets on the string playing out a story that God had written for us, moving when God said move, without making that choice. But God did not desire playthings. God desired partners. So we've identified the problem. We are all too likely to listen to the voice of the tempter, to the voice of the liar, than to the voice of God. To trust the voice that slithers into our brains saying, you are not enough. You didn't do enough yet. You do not have enough. If you just had one more, maybe that would be enough. You can have it all if you just lean on your own understanding. You know better than God anyway, right? We can testify with our own lives that listening to that voice leads us to hide from ourselves, from one another, and from God. How many of us have shut the door and not answered the doorbell because our house was too messy for anyone else to see? We know the problem, and we have to admit we're powerless over it. As Paul writes elsewhere in the 7th chapter of Romans, Paul writes, I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. And it is as it is. Here's where it gets all confusing. If y'all want to follow me in chapter 7, verse 15. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but sin living in me. For I know that good itself does not dwell in me. That is my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, I do. This I keep on doing. You ever sound like Paul? Why do I do that? Now, if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it. I really appreciate how Paul separates himself from the sin. The problem is when we identify ourselves or others as that sin. I overeat. I'm an overeater. I hurt my friend. I'm a herter. But God says these are separate. Paul lets us know, I am not the sin. I am the God-beloved child, filled with God's breath. Why is that sin there? If we're going to conquer this problem, we're going to need some help. We can't do it alone. Paul tells us in some mysterious way Jesus is the solution to the problem. Kind of a one-for-one thing. Adam, Jesus, only Paul says Jesus is more than what Adam did. Adam's choice leads to death. Jesus' choice leads to life. Adam chooses more and ends up with less. Jesus chooses less and ends up with more. It's hard to understand, isn't it? In the weeks to come during this season of Lent, we're going to hold this mystery in our hands like a jeweler might hold a finely cut diamond, and we're going to look at all of its facets. How is it that Jesus undoes this sin that leads to death for us? How is it that Jesus covers us like God covered Adam and Eve before God sent them out of the garden? We have a doctrine and a teaching for that too, because we are the church. The doctrine is called atonement. It's a collection of theories about how God makes it so that we don't have to hide anymore, of how God turns death into life. We have doctrines and theories, but God has a story for us. A story of one who entered into 40 days set apart, just as we're doing now in the season of Lent, who was tempted there in the wilderness by a voice that wanted him to doubt his identity as God's son. If you're God's son, prove it. Who wanted him to worship him and not God. God gave us the story of one who chose not to listen to that voice, but chose instead to believe God and trust God and worship God alone. Atonement theories remind us that Jesus is a model for us. And so the way that we saw Jesus resist that temptation in the wilderness, that's a model for us. But they also remind us, atonement theories also remind us that Jesus is a strength for us, a sacrifice for us. And in the end, what seems like loss is victory. So today, we admit we have a problem. The good we do, we would not do. That which we don't want to do, we do. In the weeks to come, we'll wrestle with the solution. The one who came to die our death so that we could live his life. The one whose love for us will not let us go, even if we go all the way to Germany. The one who becomes for us the tree of life. Amen.